Most of the obstacles you find around governor limits as it pertains to Apex are often contending with the structure of the database transaction as it exists on Salesforce. Let's talk about Apex for a moment. An Apex trigger should follow a consistent structure. I think naturally we know this, but we'll get into some tips on what that means in the next module. I know that if you've only recently started writing Apex triggers, there might be questions about what that sort of best practice structure for Apex triggers is. Don't worry, we'll get there. To simplify, it usually means following a pattern of retrieving related objects via SOQL. For example, if an Apex trigger is acting on the account, it might need to query records pertaining to the opportunity, to contacts, or any number of custom objects that have been configured to be related to the account. Those related objects are retrieved through SOQL queries and put into SObject collections in memory within the trigger. Then transform each record. When I say transform, I really mean the meat of our trigger, writing values into fields. This is where your conditionals go, or for instance, if an opportunity amount is over 100,000, then submit to approval by a manager or something similar, or update a number of related fields on other objects. I'm referring to this as a transformation because the records come out as something potentially different than how they went in to the trigger. They are therefore transformed. Finally, perform any inserts, updates, or deletions as a post-processing step. This pertains to objects that are related to the object in question for the trigger itself. Likewise, to avoid limits, try to limit the numbers that correspond to each overall part of this consistent structure. Reduce the number of SOQL queries being run. There might be some cases where you need different record types of the same object, for example. It is usually better to write a single query that retrieves those multiple record types than to write a query for each type to retrieve multiple lists. After you get all the records together, you can then filter them into different collections in memory. Reduce the number of loops, especially times when there are large list sizes. It is possible in many situations for queries that retrieve related records to return thousands in their results. Every time the code has to loop through that list of thousands of results, that burns precious milliseconds against the governor limits we have available for consumption of CPU time. And of course, limit the number of inserts, updates, and deletes. Generally, I recommend having one transaction type for each object type. You may have, for example, multiple different kinds of case records that need to be inserted following some action. Similar to what I just said about queries, don't break up the insertion of those records by their different types. Instead, just lump all of them into one list for insertion and insert that entire list. And that's just the Apex side. Don't forget that all the automation on the platform affects what the code is trying to do as well. All other automation tools that execute in a transaction count against these same limits. I recommend pausing the video right now to go to this URL here on the slide and read about the Salesforce process best practices. Among the recommendations you'll find there are using a single tool for each object. What this means is, if you've gotten to the point where objects need Apex, then try moving all your automation into Apex. That's not always necessary, of course, because sometimes you can get away with all logic on an object existing in Flow Builder, for example. But don't mix those tools together if you can avoid it. Once you have workflow field updates, which then trigger conditions on a process builder or flow builder flow to fire logic, now the Apex has a lot more to worry about. Edge cases have a chance to then result in blowing up the number of queries being run, the number of milliseconds consumed in CPU time, and so on. Remember, these automation tools have to run their own queries and consume their own time, and sometimes even use their own insert, update, or delete statements. That means they count against the limits that Apex code has to work inside of as well. It all counts, so try to stick to one tool per object if possible, because it will be dramatically easier to maintain and work on into the future. Don't worry, by the way, about seeing exactly what I'm talking about here. We're going to dig into examples like this in this course. I'll show you WiredBrain Coffee's Salesforce org, which has been put together in a rush of developer and admin activity without much oversight or technical standards to speak of. We'll design new transactions and solve existing problems. With that, let's get the Wired Brain Coffee metadata into your developer org by using the point-and-click installer for the course in the next clip.